The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Ask an Expert webinar on fundraising planning. I'm Mitch Menchaca, Executive Director of the Association of California Symphony Orchestras, and I'm excited that you have joined us today. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items on today's webinar. You have joined today's webinar in listen-only mode and can hear today's presentation through your computer speakers. We want to make sure that this webinar is interactive even though you are muted and in listen-only mode. One way to participate is to ask questions. To ask a question, simply type in your question in the questions pane and hit submit. During the presentation, we will take time to address questions that have been submitted, and we will also try to do Q&A at the end of the presentation. Another way to participate is through poll questions. Our presenter will ask a series of multiple choice questions that you will see on your screen for you to answer. Answering poll questions allows the presenter to know a little bit about you and your organization. If you run into any problems during today's webinar, please call the AXO office at 916-484-6744 or email us at membership@axo.org. Today's webinar is being recorded for archival purposes. Now let's begin today's webinar. Our presenter is Cordy Fangler. Cordy has 3 decades of experience in philanthropy and has worked both as a development officer and a consultant. She served as Canon for Development at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, Director of Development for the San Francisco Symphony, and is presently board chair and CEO of Capella SF, a professional chamber choir in the Bay Area. Cordy is a past AXO board member and currently serves on the board of Chorus America. Welcome, Cordy.
Hi, everybody. I think I need to click a button here. Are we all set there, Mitch?
There you are.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy you're here in the midst of the holiday season, which is crazy, I know. So thank you for taking the time out. I'm going to start with your exam questions right at the beginning with 2 polls quickly right in a row. So, Mitch, can you do that? The first one is just a quick idea on what your budget size is. And the second one is about your role with the organization, which will help me scream through these slides. I have far too many.
Yeah,
we can tailor it for what you are.
Well, right now, we'll give people a couple of seconds to answer. But right now, it looks like in your first poll, it is 75% of today's participants have a budget of $400,000 to $999,000. And then we have a quarter of our folks who are over $1 million. And then our second poll is, what is your role in your orchestra or organization? And we'll go ahead and give folks just a couple more seconds. All right. And it looks like, Cordy, on that poll, 20% of our participants are board members, 60% are executive directors, and 20% are staff members.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you especially to board members for coming, because you're the volunteers and you're the people who make things happen. So the question is, let me get rid of this thing off my screen so hopefully you can see everything. So where's the money? Typically, boards and even staff, when faced with needing to raise funds, look to foundations, or they look to state and local government, which we don't do a great deal of in California. And they often think that corporations will solve the problem. And if it isn't them, it's certainly the special events that we do. However, let's take a quick look at what really has been happening. This is a chart that shows you up to 2014. I don't have a USA Giving USA doesn't give you the things that quickly, but as you can see, what we see here, that charitable giving has been going up and up and up over the years. And just to give you a quick feel for this, you can always say, well, there's inflation. True, true. But in population, it was in 1973, it was 212 million people. It's now 316 people. In other words, we have 50% more people But the giving in 1973 was 125 billion, adjusted for inflation, and now, as you can see, in 2014, they have 86% more giving than there was in 1973. So certainly this is true. So where does it come from? Clearly, this is a very important pie chart that I sort of live with all the time with people, because what it shows you, I don't even have to ask you, is the biggest piece of the pie comes from people, individuals. And even in the foundation section, which is a 15% piece of the pie, some of those are the family foundations, which in essence many times act as though they are individuals. And then the last thing to be completely aware of is the bequests, which is also a group of individuals. So actually, if you add all that stuff together, we're talking over 80% come from individuals. Corporations do a very small amount. Now, I will say, based on this, the arts do really quite well when it comes to foundations and corporations, better than many of the other sectors. So in a certain way, certainly these percentages are overall percentages. So you can probably look to your own orchestra to see a little bit better performance from foundations and a little bit better performance from corporations. Still, where the money is with the individuals. Looking at I'm not going to show it to you, but just mention to you, you might have a question, okay, where does it go? Of that pie, of the $358 billion in 2014, 33% of it went to religion, 15% of it went to education, and only 5% to the arts. We are a much smaller segment of that entire big pie, but we're also looking at the entire country. But the reason we're here today, and I'm going to move quickly, and hopefully you will not be lost. What you do need to know, as Mitch told you before, this is being recorded for archival purposes, so you can go back to visit it. You can also have the slides at the end, so you don't have to take any notes. Let's have a quick poll 3 while I talk. Can I talk, Mitch, while poll 3 is going on?
Yes, and let me launch poll 3 for the group.
All righty.
Does your orchestra have a written annual fundraising plan?
And the question is, why do you have a written plan? Well, it forces you to decide what you have time to do. And it makes you think also about what you cannot do this year. And that's an extremely important part of it. I think we write plans that have all our wish lists in them, and then we can't do them. And so then we throw them away because we can't achieve it. So don't put more into your plan than you can achieve.
All right. And we're going to close the poll. And of the participants, 80% say no, they do not have a written annual plan, and 20% say they are unsure.
I love hearing that. That's absolutely terrific, because maybe this will give you some ideas. Actually, what I'm going to show you today in terms of a plan is one that was shown to me many, many years ago when I was Director of Development of the San Francisco Symphony, and we had to write a plan for that orchestra. And I, frankly, had never written an orchestra plan. So I hired a person who said, I can write a plan for you, and we started working on it together. And the tricks that she showed me have been carried me through the years, and I'm really happy to share those with you. So I don't take total credit for this plan, but I certainly have used it and altered it as we've gone through. So one of the things that a plan does, and that I'll show you in a second, is that it gives you a chance to look at what has happened in the past and to keep track of what you have done and what you haven't done every single year. And you should hang on to that, because this gives you a sense of what can be done. It's also a legacy for those of you on staff to the people who come after you. It's extremely helpful to new people to not have to reinvent the wheel entirely. So it does that. It also makes you think through the calendar. I can give you an example. You might say, okay, we'd like to do 3 mailings with personal notes to each donor asking for a list. And then you find out that you can't do it because the spring concert takes more planning than you thought. And those of us with small orchestras and small choruses know exactly what that means. Actually, with large orchestras, the same story, really. So then you have to ask yourself the next year if you should do the mailing in the spring or not do the mailing in the spring, that type of thing. So let's look quickly at some of the elements of a plan. I like to look at the tracking giving over the past 5 to 7 years. I take a look at the chart of gifts. I'll show you an example of each of these, looking at goals, and then looking at strategies and the kinds of tactics that you're going to use that year. So it's very important to go back, if you don't really know, and to look up how much you raised the years before. So here's page 1, an example of a plan that I like to do. I usually make this pages 1 and 2 so you can see it better. What I've put here is a simple, very simple income versus expenses chart that helps you see if the orchestra has overspent its income or not, and that's simply everything. That can include earned income as well. But it gives you the picture of the orchestra and how you're doing physically each year. And then the pie chart, which I don't have numbers on, is an example of what you raised last year from each of these areas: foundations, government, corporations, individuals, and your special event, which could be more than one if you do that. So the pie chart is just the contributed giving, and the other chart is kind of the overall budget of the orchestra. So that's a page 1 idea. So obviously you need to begin with goals. You want numbers, but you also need those non-numeric strategic goals, which are the ones that are going to get you to the numbers. I could tell you 10 or 20 stories about my last comment on this slide about being sure to ask the development committee to help set these goals. There is nothing like a board that's engaged because they have ownership of the goals themselves. And actually, I'm going to take a second to do it because I went to tell you one quick story. I went up to do some consulting for the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra many years ago, and they asked me to be an interim development director, and I got up there. It was nice and cold in St. Paul, and there we were sitting there, and I got handed a budget with a large number to raise. I had no idea what was to happen, and then I met the development chairs, the co-chairs of the development committee, and these two gentlemen stood up and said, "We're not going to buy into this. The answer is no. We know we can't raise this much money." So we ended up having to negotiate what that should be, because the number that we've been given was indeed a plug number, the one that you fill in the blank. You need to raise this much money because that's how much we're going to spend. You know what it is. It hadn't been built from the bottom. And once we did the negotiation and they whittled down the goal a little bit, they raised not only the goal, but a few extra dollars that sort of made up for the amount of that plug number anyway, because they were highly motivated. But it really means that they were bought in, and it was just great to have these allies to work through executing the goals. So on page 2, I typically put in a plan simply an overall chart that shows how much was raised this year, last year, how much was raised, what the goal was last year, how well we did, and then the goal in these general areas. And my numbers are going to be very small for many of you. I'm sorry, you can either add zeros or multiply them by something, but I'm using these smaller numbers so they show up on the screen, and I hope that works for you. You can see the comparison. In this case, what we're looking at is an orchestra that raised a little bit more than the year before, but now has to make a big jump. And their year before goal was way out of line. They just couldn't do it. So that's a very important thing to take a look with. I'm just looking at a note here to be sure that I think that this is a great way to bring the development committee through this with you. So here's how I like to think a little bit about goals. All the gifts and grants for this year that we're going to look at obviously typically form a pyramid. So you pay attention to your largest gifts and grants, and we'll talk later about what is the largest gift and grant and what is a major gift. But for now, it can be any number that works for you. Here's a smallish orchestra that considers that a $20,000 gift is really huge for them. So those are the people you have to pay a lot of attention to, and the idea of this whole development plan is to move the people who are in the bottom parts of your pyramid up to the next ones, and to think about the strategies that will do that, and then to bring a lot of new people, if you can, into the lower level, or maybe luckily into the high. So here's what Barbara, my consultant friend from the San Francisco Symphony, showed me originally, and I'm going to noodle with this with you for a little bit, so you see how I do some thinking, but feel free to ask any questions as you come along. This is an example with very low numbers of a very small organization that only needs to raise $100,000. And what I usually do each year is I fill this in for what we did do, and then I make a new one for what we'd like to do next year, and we'll talk about that later. But here's what we did do. We got a gift of $15,000. That was our top gift, and we needed. Typically, the wisdom is in development that you really need 3 prospects for every gift. That's typically true of capital campaigns. You need to ask 3 people for that amount in order to get 1. We also know when we're doing annual fund plans that there are many people who consistently repeat, and many organizations, foundations, and corporations that consistently repeat. So you can adjust the number of prospects that you need based on a little bit of that. And then the blank column on the right-hand side is to count the number of prospects we have. So let's say last year we raised 1 gift of $10,000, and we really only have 2 people we can ask this coming year. We should have 3, but we really only have 2 to ask. And next year we might want to try to raise 2 gifts of $10,000, in which case we will need to ask more than 2 people, unless we're very, very sure. So that's kind of the idea of this chart. And what it does is it forces you to go down through the levels and to do a quick analysis of what you've actually received. You may ask, what is this left-hand column? How many gifts we need? This is in order to get to the $100,000 level. Typically, you will need a gift of $15,000, a gift of $10,000, 2 gifts of $7,500. That's kind of what comes out of the book. You will adjust that based on your own experience. So you may have an orchestra that has a gift of $25,000 because you have I'm talking about a $100,000, okay, fundraising thing here, theoretically. That has one patron who gives you $25,000 each year. Oh, how wonderful that is. But then you really don't have anybody else who gives you 10 or 15, and the next biggest gift you get is 5. You need to adjust the left-hand column to the numbers that you will need, and also do some heavy thinking about how you're going to fill in that hole. How will we get a $7,500 gift or a $10,000 gift? Or how will we get those 10 people that we thought were giving $1,000 to move up to $1,500? That will be part of the strategy. But this is a picture. So this is the overall goal, and you can make this for your orchestra with all the foundation things in it and all the corporate things, or you can just stick to individuals to do the analysis. But in any case, it works. We're talking about the numbers, and we've based so far the numbers on what we raised the year before. And so now we need to talk about the non-numeric things. Some of them will be semi-numeric. We've got this kind of thing, but here's I'll give you 2 slides with some sample ideas, and I know you will do way better than I in adapting any kind of strategic goal that you think of for your development effort to yourselves. But let's say you'd really like to improve. You know how many people repeat their gifts, and 45% of your donors give again every year. But let's see if we can't do better than that. So let's focus a little bit on the people who might not repeat. So that would be that. Or perhaps we'd like to chase down 15 people who gave 2 years before and try to encourage them to give and jump back in. And we'll think about the strategies on how to do that. Other examples, you may be in a different place and have to review the benefits that you're able to offer to your patrons. And naming opportunities we can talk about a little bit later, but that sometimes is an enticement for people to give. I just completed writing up some for this course that I work with, and it takes some thinking to ponder what typically a person can put his or her name on, or support even anonymously, such as the typical thing is sponsoring a concert, but there are many other things that you can bring to that table. You may have some work to do with your board, and you should put that in as the goal and try to be as specific as possible. It may be to bring in 2 or 3 more people to get them excited about development. Maybe there's another way to collaborate so that you can raise more money. Example of our chorus, we collaborated with an environmental group for one of our concerts, and both organizations went out to build audience and to get gifts, and everybody got some money. That really worked well. This is the kind of thing that you would do. Some more ideas here, or some more thoughts here that I know you can read them, and get them into your plan. Now, strategic goals are great. You have to be careful that they're not more than you can do, but remember, the strategy is one thing, and then how you're going to get there, the tactics, is another. We're down kind of at a tactical level on this, but with a development plan, you really almost have to be at a tactical level, because it's projects that you need to accomplish. And then you put the calendar to them. When will we put that new development software in? When will we form a former board group to encourage our former board members to do it? And how much time will it take, and what will we do with them? Those are the details that you need to get into. I know Course America's done some work, a lot of work, with forming their former board group and built it to, it just never even met several years ago, and now they do, and they really feel far more engaged, I think, than they ever have in the past. So it tends to be worth it to spend that kind of time on that. Any questions at this point?
I think we're
okay.
Mm-hmm.
We're good. Everybody's sort of hanging in there, I hope. Let's move to the foundation side. I'm going to talk a little bit about foundations, slip the government in, mention a special event, talk to you about individuals, and part of this is tactics, and part of this is what to write in the plan. So let's do a quick poll, and I'm going to let you look at this next slide while you're doing it. So have you written a proposal or been part of getting money from a foundation yourself?
We'll give folks a few seconds to answer. Have you ever written a foundation or government grant proposal? Couple more seconds. All right. It looks like, Cordy, that a third of our group has said yes, a third of our group has said no, and a third has said no, but I have read one.
Okay, very good. Reading is part of the game. Yeah, you get a feel for it. First of all, to remember that within the foundation world, there are sort of two kinds. That is those that I call more public foundations. You need to write a proposal to them. They have staff very typically. You have guidelines that have to work. And others are family foundations, which are basically, in some ways, donor-designated type funds. Not all require proposals. I've gotten money from some that don't require any proposal, but then they say they won't accept any, and others that even family foundations that you have to write a letter or a proposal for. But here's a sample of the box that goes into the plan. And again, these boxes, each section of the plan being what it is, allow you to analyze that stuff that we looked at at the very beginning in more detail. So this is an example of a little history of how many grants we used to get and what our goal would be for this year. Some kind of comments about the timing, which is really important, because as those of you who know who've written foundation proposals, you need to save the time to do it. And it takes away from the other things that you're doing. So you can't be running 3 concerts and writing a foundation proposal all at the same time. So that you have to be aware of that. And then when the final reports are due, those things have to be written too, and they have to be done on time. We then talk about, if you can, put the number of prospects that you have. Many people keep a grants calendar, list, like an Excel spreadsheet of all the names of all the foundations that they have to make proposals for, with going across the line dates and all that kind of thing, and the percentage chance of actually getting the grant. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So let's talk a little bit. Since a number of you haven't done a great deal of work with foundations, I'll give you some of the things that I've learned. I'm not the great expert on writing foundation proposals, but I can tell you a number of things. I've read a lot myself. So one question is, should I really be contacting the funders directly? And let's talk about the ones that require a proposal. And the answer to that is yes. Many foundations prefer that you call them before sending a letter or a proposal, as long as your prospect hasn't clearly stated no phone calls on its website or no materials from grant seekers. You will find on the websites of these foundations the guidelines and the rules, and you need to be really, really good about sticking to those. This is for the more public ones that I'm talking about. The question comes up about program officers versus board members, and it's just a caveat for you to know. I know that many times you know one of the board members of a foundation, a local foundation in your area, and you really don't know the program officer very well. Be aware that if there is a program officer, that person has quite a bit of ownership of what goes on in the foundation, even though the board itself makes all the decisions. So don't go around the program officer ever. Always include them as much as possible, and then if it's right, then you can talk to your board member and that foundation's board member, who is your friend or your colleague, and do that. The other caveat I've already said: do your homework. Absolutely be sure about it. Many foundations like an inquiry letter, and that would be a shorter one that they can read, just saying the ground rules of the proposal that you'd like to make without doing a great deal of detail, and asking if it's all right if you submit. And again, meet the deadlines, of course. I certainly know there have been foundations that if they get the proposal in 1 minute too late, they throw it away. So it's just not worth missing those. You will obviously in your life have proposals decline. Don't be afraid to ask why. They'll tell you. There's no skin off their backs to do it. You need to make a case for your orchestra, and being brief but compelling and really reducing the number of words you make them read is terribly important. Being very clear about who you are and what your dreams are, but also try to focus on what is unique about your orchestra and state that very clearly. Examples: we do all 21st century music. We focus on older people. We have diversity in our students or our underserved community. We are all Baroque. We are a group of young musicians, etc. Whatever your specialty is, you need to be able to state it. And I can also tell you that you might say, but we're not anything super special. The chorus that I'm running now is a professional chorus that does works from all centuries, just about, and wants to present the great choral repertoire. That's who they are, and they're not afraid to say it. So you're okay. So it should come a little more, the case that you're going to write for your staff will write, or maybe you'll have to do it yourself as board members, for your orchestra should probably come a little more from the head for corporate and foundation proposals, and then have a from the heart type of case statement for individuals, because that's where you reach out to their hearts and their feelings. Okay, so now you have a case statement and you're going to write the proposal. Again, stick to the guidelines and the deadlines. Do have a one-page summary that leads the thing off, so that someone can read that and have a real good idea of what the rest of it's about. And when and take out the adjectives and the superlatives about yourselves, and stick to, and any value statements are really important to stick to what you do and why you do it. Also tell them how you're going to evaluate whatever the project is you're asking for money for. And you need to put in a budget and your nonprofit status. That's nothing new to you in any kind of proposal, a board information list. You may need a recent 990 tax form or an audited statement. You can check their guidelines to see if that's true. I'm going to move to government, and then we'll see if we have any questions. The government, in this one, I'm really not quite as much an expert on, although my colleagues who've been writing these things have been tearing their hair for years because they're very long and complicated. But basically, it's the same as a foundation proposal, except even more so, sticking to the guidelines and consulting with them. And you can check with the government organization that tells you what needs to be done. So that's really the main extra thing I would say. Again, their governments are checked. This is especially true for stuff for the NEA. I would say that if you're small, as our course is, and you don't have much time, look at the size of the government grant you might be able to expect. And the smaller you are, the smaller the government grant's going to be. And then decide if the time that it takes to apply is actually appropriate to the yield. Or would it be better to go out and ask an individual for that money? That's a decision you need to make right in the plan that you do and make and have it feel. You don't have to go after government money unless you really want to. Any questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple. Can you describe how to best prepare board members for face-to-face asks? What does the ideal prospect dossier include prior to that meeting?
Oh, I love that question. Can I hold that till we start talking about individuals? Because that's exactly where that's the right question to be asking, and the place where we need to do it is with individuals. You're less likely to do it in the foundation world, although you could be face-to-face in a corporate thing. I will say this about the face-to-face corporate and foundation meetings. These are people who are giving not their own money, so that the and that's why I said something about the case statement being more from the head and being very specific and clear about what you're doing and what you're not doing, and not so much from the heart, although obviously they want to support the good people in the community. But let's talk about, hold that question and let me try to remember it when we get down to the individual side.
Okay, and I will also, there's a follow-up about who should be in those ask meetings, board members, executive development directors, musicians, so I'll make sure to make a note when we get to that individual.
Okay, you stop me when we get there and we'll try to thunder on through and definitely get there. Let me just talk briefly about corporations. It's really hard. Again, you have the box. This goes in your development plan. You need to, again, to focus on the number of grants that you're going to do, the number of repeated sponsorships that you think you're going to get, ones that were one-off and you're not going to get. I would say that it's not always the first go-to because they're very difficult, but the fact of the matter is it's really, really hard. And I'm finding, too, that it's discouraging as it sounds. It's very encouraging for the right nonprofits, but the corporations tend to be focusing a lot now on social services because it looks good in the community. On the other hand, let's go on and talk a little bit about corporations because there are some things that happen. They are still only accountable for a total of 4 to 5% of the total giving, and so we're not looking at a huge amount. However, there are several things. In corporate support, you can get matching gifts, and many corporations will do that. So be sure to be aware that you can tell your donors they can get them and see if you can work with them. It's also useful to know if you do have a list of corporations in your area that actually do matching gifts in case you discover someone who works for that organization. That person has to submit within his or her employment location the request for it, but they do it. It's one of the perks that corporations give to their employees. A number of corporations do have corporate foundations, and they often are just like the public foundations, and you have to make proposals to them. And there's that. On the other side, as part of the other employee involvement bit, there are volunteering capabilities and that kind of thing. And then outside of the outright grant money, there is marketing support, which typically comes from a different budget. So it will be from their marketing dollars, and they may sponsor an event, they might do that kind of thing, in fact, there. And then finally, businesses very often will give you equipment or services or space or food, and if you do get this kind of thing, you should be sure that you're aware of the budget relieving aspect that is for your budget, because if that goes away, you will have to buy it at the end. So why would they give you marketing dollars instead of the outright ones? Well, clearly they want to look like good citizens, so building their name. They do have some charitable goals within them, and they would like to have that. They also want to see your invitation list. They would want to get in front of your people. And if they sponsor an event, which many of them will do, especially private wealth management, banks, that kind of thing, it allows them to mix and mingle with your people. Sometimes their in-kind gifts are also thought of as building their brand, so that you can think about what you would do to promote their names, both in your programs and as at your own events. And again, if you have a specific project that actually aligns with their charitable giving foundation side philanthropic efforts, then you can play to that, and that can make it. It might be that you're doing something for a special community that they have an interest in, that kind of thing. But the fact of the matter is, it is definitely a quid pro quo. There. So, moving on to the next box in your plan. I think we're pretty good on time, so we'll be able to talk a lot about individuals. Again, one of the easy things that people think are easy to do are special events, because, oh, well, people buy things and it'll be a golf tournament will be great and everybody will come. But the fact of the matter is, although this is the first thing many people think of and think it's an activity they're familiar with, staff usually cringes, I will say. I hope I hear some laughing going on among staff, because it takes a lot of effort. Some special events are one-off in many ways. I mean, people think that there's a good way to raise money, but it is not necessarily a good way to get new audience in your hall. And so they have this funny idea that they're really safe from having to ask for a gift for a special event. But the fact is, with almost everything that you do in a special event, you're having to ask for someone to help. It just might be in kind, or it might be volunteer time, etc. This box is not totally full, and I would say, as you write your annual fund plan, I would suggest that you also add, in addition to the list of the events and the goals that you have for raising money, and this needs to be net money that you would raise, and underneath it you see that idea of full income, the gross income and expense, and the net. And also add things like how many volunteers you need, how many hours of staff time you need, how many sponsors you need, and what they need to be. And that will be a very special part of it. The general wisdom is that if you're going to do a special event, it should not cost more than twice what you want to raise. So you want half of what you want to raise. That's a dollar raised for every 50 cents spent. And it's really important to put that to it, because many times small groups do special events and they'll spend $8,000 on the event and raise a total of $1,500 or $2,000 net. And it's very difficult when you spend all your time doing that. Again, part of the plan is your strategic development plan is to figure out where to spend your time, and that is the kind of thing that you also do. And you need to figure out how much staff time is being used, so that also costs you money. So we do little decisions about how to do it. I'm going to tell you a really quick story. I think we have time for it. But again, because of the special event issue, it's something I've always carried with me. My very first day at the San Francisco Symphony, I got a telephone call from the board chair. She said, "You've got to come to lunch with my friend," and I'll just call her Jane, with Jane, and convince her not to do a decorator showcase house, because it's now October, and she wants to do one on the 4th of December. And I thought, oh, this is the quickest way I'm going to leave this job. I had no idea I was going to talk this very important volunteer out of doing something she wanted. So off we went to lunch, and I racked my brains, and then I took that little thing at the top with me, a blank sheet of paper, and on it I wrote pro and con and drew a line down the middle. And together we started to fill it out. So what are the good advantages of doing this? And she listed this in number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then, well, but there's a number 1 con. This might be a problem. Well, by the time we got finished with lunch, she had filled in 5 or 6 things in the pro column and about 18 in the con column, which was a great relief to me. And then she said, well, I guess we better not do it. And you can imagine trying to pull together if you know what a decorator showcase house is, it's where they take a house, redecorate the whole thing, and charge all kinds of money, and people come and look at it, and it's a big event, great big event. Fast forward to December. I was sitting at my desk having not thought one bit about what day it was or anything like that, and the phone rang again, and it was Jane. And Jane said, "Do you know what day it is?" And I said, "Oh, it's December 4th." And she said, "Yes, and it's raining. Aren't you glad we didn't do the decorator showcase house?" So there are reasons to do things or not, and now you've been reading the rest of my slide, and so you can see that. Are there clear objectives? Do you have the right audience? Are you going to serve the constituency you need to do? What benefit do you really do? Do you have time to do this thing? Do you have enough volunteers? All of those things are part of the decision whether you should do a special event or not. So I just say to you, as you create a plan, to take the special event in and put it in your plan, and make sure that you've looked at it very carefully from a kind of a numeric point of view as well. Let's move on to individuals. Well, clearly, this is the most common reason people say that they give. And yes, it does, apropos of your two questions, it does take more than this, but the ask is the final step that you must take. If you don't ask, you don't get. Once again, we remember that they are certainly that 80% or 72% or however much you want to call it of all the money. That's where the money is. And let us take a look and think about how we divide these things up. I'm not going to do your major gift level, but we do have major donors of some amount, mid-sized donors, and members and friends. So I'm sure you have, amongst your donors, people who fall into those types of categories. And let's talk a little bit about each category and how we will do it. We'll take a look at the plan, once again, the famous box. And here we are looking at all the individuals together. So how much did you raise from individuals back then and the year before and this year, and what's the new board goal? I'm sorry, my dates are a little weird. I went through these slides to kind of update dates, and I think some of them are 2017 and some are 2016, but you know what I'm talking about. If it says goal, it means this next year. Look at how many you have. Look at how many board members you have. Look at a very important aspect is what is your board goal, and I hope each of you in your orchestras have one and that you delineate it separately. How many people, how many board members, and how many board members will give. So you're now looking at the number of goals, and also last year, let's say we had 231 donors and we want 260. What's that mean? That means we got to go find 29 people. I think I added it right. And at the bottom, we have an average gift. The three largest gifts that are total up, in this case, we were talking about a small orchestra that has three gifts that add up to $25,000. That's their top level. And what is the average gift without those three largest gifts? Because otherwise, it's not a particularly meaningful thing. The timeline, you could differentiate far more than I've done here. I mean, basically this goes from September through May, which is typically a season. You don't typically raise money in the summer. But you may want to delineate other things such as when things will go out. But let's get into some of the details of looking at the different levels at this point. So we'll look quickly at the direct mail. And again, you're going to have your own goals within. How many times you want to do it? How do you want to do it? One of the things we found as we look through with direct mail these days, it's getting more expensive. Of course, we all know that. And the world is changing. Young people need to be texted practically. Sometimes the middle people are doing emails, but they're very much more so that the direct mail certainly works well with the older generation, such as my generation. People like boomers and silent generation folks, because they're used to that. That's how they grew up. On the other hand, it's still something there with all. So you want to know when a good time is to send it, and you want to think through not only your season, but when are all the holidays, when are people being bombarded with other things, and then you want to focus the whole thing to be very targeted and very tailored. The design of your direct mail should be coordinated enough that your online communications and your direct mail look like they might even be related to one another. That means using your logo and that kind of thing. And certainly you can use a combination today with online giving as a way. So let me see. I want to do kind of slip through that very quickly. We can always talk about how you write a letter, but I think you probably are all good at it. The secret in direct mail is to get people to open the letter and then to read it. So how do you do that? You make it from somebody they know by having the address on the envelope with the person's name who's sending it to them. Use good quality stationery. The best outer envelope is plain with only the return address on it. And it does continue to work for all of us. It should not, however, be the only way we do it. So a lot of people have found that, oh, email is so easy. It doesn't cost anything and that kind of thing. But you all probably also know, as I certainly do, that our inboxes have been cluttered with an overabundance of repetitive emails. And I would say yesterday was probably a good example of it. Giving Tuesday it's lovely, but again, that's a lot of emails that come. I think I was meeting with a person last night about a gift, and he said he got 100 emails yesterday asking for money. But you also should communicate through email. So you don't want to clutter over the year. You don't want to clutter up your donor's inbox with too many other emails. And typically, you do write some kind of newsletter, things to keep them involved, and only occasionally solicit money via email. But you also want to think about how many emails you send of newsletters so that you don't annoy your supporters, but you keep them interested. So the most important thing when you do an email is to be sure you have some kind of robust new information for them. Stick to sending emails that are really worth something to the reader. And then if you do send solicitation emails, you can certainly send them once a year, but you can send them quarterly, but I would not personally recommend that you do more than that. You also have to focus on the fact that they read emails on their phones and other mobile devices, so you need to design them carefully so they can be read. And typically, I've been told that getting an active link to something special, a recording of your orchestra or a special announcement, people like that a lot, and it's kind of like a little reward for opening the email. And do track the activity. Any questions on direct mail or email?
Cordy, we have one question. When you mentioned the envelopes and such on letters, is it best to do handwritten addresses or printed on the envelope or labels? What's the best option?
Personally, I open the handwritten addresses if you can do it. That's a lot to ask from an orchestra, but I certainly would not use labels. And the other thing that, strangely enough, affects people is whether or not you use a real stamp. That's hard to do. You'll have to make your decision based on the cost of the mailing. If you have a very big mailing, very often you're going to have to do it on the nonprofit rate and print it in the easiest way possible for postage. If you have a small mailing and you're targeting very carefully among a small group, I handwrite them and put a stamp on if you can. At least have some return address that looks like it comes from a real person. So the more it looks like a first-class letter that's personal, the better. I think it's maybe the way to say that. And again, you have to make that decision yourselves because everything has a cost. It takes time and it takes effort.
Great. And I also just wanted to go back, as we're in the individuals, about preparing board members for face-to-face asks and what is the ideal document to include prior to that meeting and who should be in the meeting.
And this is a perfect question for major gifts. So let's talk about major gifts. We got plenty of time to do it, and we'll focus on this exactly what you're talking about now. So what is it that makes people give? These are very important questions to ponder as you write the plan and as you yourself think about how you're going to work or solicit someone. You want to think about what makes people give, what makes an individual person give. So you may know Mrs. Gottrocks, who has absolutely no interest whatsoever in Baroque music, but she just loves 20th century music. We're going to be very focused on what we would ask her to do. So that's part of it. You want to get to know that person really well in terms of that person's interests. Who are the prospects that we got? We'll take a quick look at that. Obviously, your best prospects for bigger gifts are the people who've already given you money, so they already like you. And that certainly is true with which we'll look at in this gift pyramid in 1 second. And then, just as you've asked, how do we move them to the gift and who goes with them? So I'll give you a quick answer about who goes to ask. On a face-to-face, I think each person, each donor is very separate. There are some who will only give if the music director comes and asks for them. There are others who will only talk to board members. And there are other people who think staff is just fine. And I personally don't think there is an answer to that. I was always told when I was in the education business for many years, you take a board member and a staff person, and then you split up the talk between the two, and you certainly can. 2-on-1 is always better, or 2-on-2, having two people together. But then once you get to know somebody a little bit, sometimes it's better not to. So last night I went to solicit a couple, and I didn't take my music director with me, although they just adore him and would love to have seen him, but they were ready to be asked, and we'd already met before, the two of us, and had not asked them for money. And then we staged that so that when I did go to ask for money, they were totally ready for the gift, to be asked for the gift. So this all has to go into your annual plan. So let's take a look here. While we're looking at this and your eyes are spinning at the chart, let's do poll 5.
Great.
What is a gift for your orchestra?
All right. So what do you think qualifies as a major gift for your orchestra? $5,000 or more, or possibly way more. $1,000 to $4,999, $500 to $999, or you haven't decided. So we'll go ahead and give people a couple more seconds to respond. All right. And Cordy, it looks like all of our participants say that it's $5,000 or more.
Right. And I probably set that way too low, but I'm glad to see that. So let's just say we're going 5,000. That includes the 10, 15, etc. So now let's take a look at that gift chart that I showed you, but this time it's just for individuals. And here we have done some filling in. So let's say our top gift is a $15,000 gift that we are hoping to get. Well, we're only going to raise $70,000 this year, but never mind. That's just numbers. So out of this, we have somebody who has given it to us before, and here Mrs. Gottrocks is probably going to repeat. So we really don't need any more because we know she's going to repeat. Now, if we ever wanted a second gift, we probably would need to ask another 3 people. Okay. Line 2, we would like to have a gift of $7,500. Again, you're going to be multiplying these numbers out for yourselves for how you fill it, but this is just a sample. We really need 3 because we haven't had any before, and we only have 2 people we can ask. Now, what's different between this chart and the one I showed you before? The one I showed you before is last year's giving, sort of the 2 charts for the overall giving, and then a goal for the overall orchestra. This one is just the individuals who are going to give money to you. So we're not including foundations, corporations, any of that kind of thing here. And what you do, and this has been what's really been helpful, is you fill in the names of the prospects of people who might give you the gifts at that level. Chances are, if I'm looking at this, that Mr. Richmond and Mrs. Monet each gave gifts of $5,000 last year. And what you're hoping is that they might consider a $7,500 gift because you have a really special project that is a $7,500 thing, like a recording, let's say, that you want to get them to help you sponsor, or a special concert, that kind of thing. And so these are not necessarily the gifts that they gave last year at that level. You know at the top level from this chart looking at it, Mrs. Gottrocks is never going to give you more than $15,000. You can ask her for 20, but you're going to get 15, so don't count on it. Whereas here, the next level down, you may have several people who could. Now, looking at the third level down, what that is an example of is you really need, you want 2 gifts at this level. We know we're going to get a repeat of 1, And now we need to ask 3 other people who've never given us $5,000 before to give at that level. And we do have 4 people we can ask. How helpful. That's great. And probably 2 of them will continue to give at the $2,500 level or even the $1,000 level, whatever they used to do in the past. But hopefully one of them will come up along the way. And that's kind of how you move people up the ladder. It sounds maybe to a board member, and certainly at the beginning when I first ran into this, and I'm just going to say it because I can't see you and we aren't looking at each other, so I don't know who's going, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can stand to do this. This is so analytical, I guess, if you put it that way. But I think what you learn in this business is that it's all right to think about money. These are people who are giving you money, and they're happy to give it to you for that reason. They're not hiding it. And they are, if they get the recognition they need and the love they need from you and the interest and the commitment to the orchestra, they're going to be just fine. And it's perfectly all right to think about asking them for more, not just to slap a percentage on, but to actually sit down one-on-one and talk through it. And if they say no, it's okay. Each person should have control over his or her own money. So if they say yes, great. In fact, actually, remember the name, I think I called her Jane, the woman, I actually solicited her for something else, and she said no to me. And I've known her for 20 years. So you get used to that. It's okay. So what goes into each box is a list of every person you'll ask for that amount of money. And when it gets down to the lowest levels and many, many donors, you're not going to fill in all those names. You can't do it. But what we hope is that you've looked through your donor list of last year, of the people who gave you less than $250, and picked out some who might be able to give you the $250 or the $500, some who need to be sat down with together and who could be brought closer to the orchestra. So let's figure this, try to answer your question about who goes and does, but by looking at a couple of things. One is I really like to try to focus on ideas that people can support, who can actually name something, or to be very specific about the kinds of things they're passionate about. There might be somebody who's very bookish who would love to help you with your music library, and they say to you, oh my gosh, I didn't realize you spent that on the music library. Let me give you a gift that will make the difference of that. And then you can acknowledge them in your program. Or they happen to love clarinets. I had a donor at San Francisco Symphony who loved a certain cello player, loved the work that he did, and so we arranged to go out for dessert after a concert one time. She was over the moon, and she immediately sponsored that chair. Very exciting. There are a lot of things you can do at different levels, and some of those things. I put the word chair in quotes here for those of you who go, what is that? This is what we call a term chair. If you don't have an endowed chair, and we're not going to talk about endowment today, can't do it really, but we can talk about that another time. But if you don't have an endowed chair, you can still have someone support your music director or your youth orchestra director or the first violinist or any of that thing for a year for a certain amount. And those gifts can be very exciting to people because they may have played the tuba when they were young, or they may have children who are trying to learn the bassoon. And it really is fun to connect them in that way. So those are things that you can think of for yourselves. Hopefully you'll have many more ideas than that. Let me see if I have any more to say here real quickly. So where are these people going to come from? Well, we've already talked about this. Where are your donors? Then you can look at ticket buyers, look at program books from other organizations. Oh yes, and I read donor walls all the time. You can't get me in. My husband says I'm crazy. Every time I go into an art museum, I stop before I ever even get in and read the donor wall. But it's surprising what you see. And the other thing is, as you are thinking about, I'll go backwards here, the top people, Mrs. Gottrox, Richmond, and Monet, and the others, make a dream list of people you would hope that you can get to come and support your orchestra, even if they're people you haven't had before. And keep that little dream list as a kind of a hip pocket list of people you want to engage. Again, it will be eventually to try to get gifts, but it's also a question of engagement, and that's the fun part of doing this work. Many people ask me about research. There are all kinds of things that the universities do. You know, how much money is this person worth and how much are their real estate holdings? I found in this business, in the arts in particular, that the most important research you can possibly do is to find out what they care about and not worry about what they own. People will decide what they can and cannot give. You're not going to be, unless you're in a major capital campaign, you're not going to be asking for much more than they can afford. And if they can't afford it, they'll tell you. Or if they don't want to afford it, they'll tell you. That's okay. But the really important thing is to figure out what they give. And you can go on the net really quickly and find out what they do. And many times, not everybody appears, but I discovered all kinds of interesting things about people by just simply typing in their names on Google and finding out that they gave talks at some university, or that they were seen at an environmental organization, or that kind of thing. You can do it for yourself and you'll find out a lot of things. It's quite amazing. So those are the most important things, is knowing your prospects' passions. And again, I can't emphasize this statement enough. I learned my lessons many times over in this. Each person thinks differently about giving, and they're all going to be different from what you think. But if you listen carefully, you very often can understand where they're coming from. Most important thing is never to project. So that quick story went back to the University of Pennsylvania. I was working with doctors, and we were going to go solicit one of the doctors on the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. It was a wonderful guy, and everybody loved him, and he was going to help do planned giving, I think. So I went into his office to talk to him about a prospect we were going to talk to, and he said, you know, oh, well, we can't go to that person. He has 3 children, and he's just not going to want to give any money to anybody. He's want to give it to his children. And I said, Art, how do you know that? Oh, he said, I don't know, but he has 3 children, and that's kind of what I expect. Don't project. As it turns out, that person was happy to share both with his children and with their organization. So building the relationship is probably going to go right back to who should be doing this, to the very good board member who asked me about asking. And that is to not only find ways to communicate, to keep a person involved, but to also spend time literally talking to them. So the role of the volunteers is, I'm sorry, I have singers here because we were talking to choruses once, but even orchestra members, and they can help you in many ways, is to get to know a patron a little bit, and just to talk about things that aren't about asking for a gift, but are about how passionate that person is about the orchestra, or listen to the other person's feelings about the music, what's played, what does the orchestra mean in the community. Those are the chances to listen. And once you've done that enough, then the time to go ask for the gift becomes self-evident, and it's not a problem. You can obviously keep in touch with people through the social media, email, etc., but don't do too much of it. The role of events, I find, unless it's a thank you event for donors, that's a great event for keeping people in touch, or a special one for subscribers, where you show up, you board members show up, and you make sure you have a list of the important people who come and are coming, and you make sure you work the room and meet those people and talk with them. Needless to say, you do have a secret weapon in most cases. Not every orchestra conductor is willing to spend the time, but I certainly have found that most people cherish the chance to meet your conductor, or your principal violin, or anybody who is an orchestra member in some way, and you don't have to ask them to ask for the money. So, time to sit down and ask for the gift. And this is my kind of last big part to try to answer your question. Your prospect has had a chance to be gotten to know. You've gotten to know him a little bit. You've set an appointment by calling on the phone, and now it's time to sit down and talk to that person. So you, the board member, and maybe a staff member go together, and it's a good way to do it. But what's the most important thing you can do? And that's written here. You must be a donor yourself. if you have stretched and you are passionate, they will catch that feeling. And that's what you're trying to do is help them to join you in feeling generous, because feeling generous is the best feeling in the whole world. So I'll just spend another little bit of time on this solicitation since we have a couple more minutes, and then we'll quickly look at stewardship. And again, you're going to want to put in your development plan how many people you'll visit that year, and then do it. Let's say you've sat down, you've had some of the niceties. I don't like to meet over lunch, by the way, or dinner, because it's so hard to get to the ask. It's much better to meet on their territory if you can, and make it short. So you've gone through the niceties, you've told them the latest things going on with the orchestra that you know about, or you've found out about it so you can tell them. You've listened to them and found out how they feel about the orchestra and what the latest feeling is, what the reactions have been to things. And then the time comes to ask, and you ask them to consider supporting a project. I typically like to ask for that. And we have a menu of those projects that is on a list that I can hand to people. And the menus are for different levels. So if it's a really big gift, I have only the top listing on that piece of paper. And then for the people who I'm not asking for the bigger gifts for, I don't have any of the big expensive things. You don't want to make them feel bad, but things that are in their general range of what you'd be asking. So would you consider supporting the clarinet section this year for this gift of this? And you hand them the list and they can see the numbers. You don't even have to state the numbers. And then what do? You do this. And it's probably the longest 10 seconds you'll ever wait in your whole life. You say nothing. And the next person who should speak is the donor, who might say, well, gee, that's a little more than I was thinking about, and doesn't say anything more. You could say, well, is there a way we can help you get there, such as spreading this out over time, or perhaps joining with someone else to do it in collaboration? Or is there something else on the list that looks appealing? And then you wait again and see what they say. Then the worst that happens is they say no. And if they say no, then you thank them for being interested, and it's very unlikely they'll say completely no. They may say, well, I can only do what I did last year, and that's fine as well. But you definitely thank them for taking the time and all that kind of thing. And I think whether you're staff or whether you're board, it almost doesn't matter. That's the way that the visit typically will go. So they've given you the gift. It's exciting. They decided to support the clarinet section. And we are absolutely thrilled. And what do you do first? The first thing you do is you thank them before even a day gets by, if you possibly can. If I don't think that the orchestra can write a letter instantly, or I can't write one, I write a hand note, or I write an email, or I even leave a phone message. That's an appropriate phone message to leave. So call. And then when you do thank someone, try to find a way to personalize that thank you letter. I mean, really personalize it. These are for the major gifts, okay? We're not talking about $25 gifts. We're talking about the gift that you just asked for, sitting down face to face. And the more you can personalize that and make it from the right thing, the better. You can send them the official thing either in the thank you letter by saying thank you for your gift received on such and such a date, or you can send that receipt later. Either way, that matters. So that's probably the most important thing you can do. And I'll tell you, I've had circumstances when people, and particularly people who in the environmental business, and some of these other nonprofits are really, really good at thanking people quickly. And I've actually, in the old days, I've actually had people, in particular when we were in the education business, and some of the universities don't get their letters out very quickly, who said, I heard from so-and-so within 48 hours, and I never heard from you for at least 2 weeks. So I think it's really important to make the thank you. It is important to send the snail mail letter. Don't just thank by email. It needs to be done. It's very important. Yeah, and you can put that tax phrase right in the letter. And then the most important thing is to continue, not to forget them, and to continue to engage them all year long in some way, and keep that on your list to do. So, any questions?
Yeah, we have, how would you recommend timing asks to avoid risking losing the individual support in other giving opportunities like special events or campaigns, etc.?
Ooh, that's a very good question. I mean, obviously that's part of your calendar in your fundraising plan to figure out when those asks are the right time. So if you have a huge special event that they're going to be tapped for in the fall, then you might want to put your ask into the spring. I have found a lot of people think you need to ask before Christmas, and yes, there are many of us. I'm one of them who make a lot of my charitable giving decisions at the very end of December, before the calendar year is up. I think it's less important when you ask. I find for people who give major gifts, you want to give them plenty of time to consider it, and it's not just the last quick decision. Whereas if you have a direct mail ask going out, you can get that out in early December, for example, for the holiday season, and hope that a lot of people do that giving at that time. But I frankly have never found in the arts that there's a particularly good time to ask, other than not being bombarded by the special event that they just came to and the other ask. And the other is that if you have a major donor you're thinking of cultivating, if you cultivated that person correctly, you can almost ask them when it's okay. Which is what happened to me last night. The music director and I had gone to meet with them, and we said, we're coming, but we're going to tell you all this cool stuff, but we're not going to ask you for money today. And they said, oh, that's really amazing. And then 4 months later, they knew perfectly well that's the reason I was coming, and it was fine. So a lot depends on the preparation.
Right. And then our last question is, when doing a thank you, should you have an official receipt that has the tax information, or if you do a handwritten note, can you handwrite it in there? Is there a procedure or protocol for that piece of information?
Well, I don't know the answer, except I would probably tend to want something typed that is some kind of receipt. So if you're doing a handwritten note, do the handwritten note, and then either have a receipt that's sent. If you're the person, the board member who's writing a handwritten note saying thank you, the official one needs to still come from the orchestra once the gift is received. One of the rules is the orchestra has to state the date that the gift was received and the amount in it. And then the other thing that needs to go in there is whether or not any goods or services were received by the orchestra in exchange for that gift. So that, for example, if you have a special event that's a dinner and it costs $200 and $100 is for the dinner and $100 is a gift, the over and above thing, which typically happens in these big galas, you need to state that in that paragraph. What I found from my lawyer friend, whom I've been working with recently, is you don't actually have to say that the gift is fully deductible up to the extent of the law. You can say that. Nobody's going to say it's a bad thing, but you can't. It's the donor's responsibility to decide about what's deductible and what isn't. It's the orchestra's responsibility to say, we got the gift, we are a nonprofit, and oh no, you didn't get any goods or services in exchange for that. And I can go on a long list of what is a good and service. We have a situation where we have very low-cost CDs that we very often will send as a thank you gift for a donation, and that's okay. You don't have to state anything. Or a mug, as long as it's not expensive. But if it's tickets to a concert, or if it's food, even at a cocktail party, you do have to state it.
Oh, great. Well, I think that we are out of time for today, but I want to thank Cordy and everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions on today's program, please feel free to contact us at membership@axo.org. And on behalf of Cordy and AXO, thank you for joining us today.